Hello, everybody, and welcome to a Safari Mack special, where I am your guide and host, helping you make connections to the wild. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you all enjoyed last weekend's Part 1 episode of the Giraffe. If you haven't seen it, though, go watch that right now and then come on back here, okay? All right. Now, as you know, for those who have been with me the longest, with every episode that I do, whether it's a 2-part episode or a 1-part episode, I always try to include the animal subjects, their influence in human culture, or how they have impacted us in our history. And of course, the giraffe is no exception. But there is so much that I would love to share. So I decided to make this special for you. So for today's Safari Mack special, we're going to talk about how giraffes rose from this animal that was unknown to become one of the most popular animals to see in a zoo or anywhere on the planet. So if you're ready, we'll get started. Now, according to history, in the early ancient civilizations such as Egypt, they were the very first to house giraffes in human care, or what we would call captivity. Though that's kind of what we would call an ugly term. So if you want to call an animal that's not living in its natural habitat, but with humans, I wouldn't say captivity, but instead human care, as it's a little more positive and it's just a better outlook. However, it wouldn't be until Rome where a giraffe was first brought back by Julius Caesar, and which from there other exotic animals as well as giraffes would be brought and would be sold to the super wealthy, or at least those who could afford it, to house in their own private menageries. Of course, though, as time passed, the giraffe, and the Roman Empire fell, giraffes kind of faded from being kept in menageries. In fact, it got to a point where even medieval Europe believed that the giraffe was nothing more but a figment of our imagination, a tall tale. Because even their Latin name of camelopard, Giraffa camelopardalis, was given that for a reason. Because for medieval Europe to think about, how can there be an offspring from a crossbreed of a leopard and a camel together? There just wasn't. Of course, though, give it time, and things can come back so suddenly. It wouldn't be until 1414 when a giraffe from Malindi was taken to China by a Chinese explorer, Zheng He, and was placed in the Ming Dynasty Zoo. Now, this animal, something like this, something that exotic, that's an immediate rise in the social class. I mean, to have a highly exotic animal living in your palace, that's pretty cool. In fact, it was so revered, they even once thought of it as many of the people of China often associated the giraffe with the Chlin, which is this guy. Basically, it's a hoofed chimerical animal that appears in Chinese mythology that is said to appear with the imminent death or arrival of either a sage or an illustrious ruler. But it doesn't end there. The Medici giraffe was presented to Lorenzo de' Medici in 1486, which would cause a major crazy frenzy in Florence. But perhaps the most famous giraffe to arrive in Europe was a giraffe named Giraffe that was brought all the way from Egypt to Paris to be presented as a gift to Charles X of France, which really, this was something highly extraordinary, that giraffe mania was born from it. So much memorabilia, clothes, plates, fans, you name it. So many different items came rolling off. and a number of them have been preserved in special places across France. In fact, there's even an animated film based on this called Giraffe, which is fairly good. It's a French movie, so it's fairly interesting, and I was intrigued by it, especially with it. While not telling all of the full truth, it did tell the story about how the first giraffe was brought to Paris, and it caused such a big stir. In fact, why else do we continue to see giraffes in zoos? I mean, they're popular, they're graceful, they're seemingly elegant, and they've always got that kind of maybe 3-year-old stare. But then again, from what I've learned from hoofstock zookeepers or animal caregivers, they've told me that working with giraffes is like working with a 3-year-old. You really got to get them to focus. But let's move away from the human, that part, and get back to the wild. So we're not talking about like Melman the giraffe from Madagascar or even Geoffrey from the Toys R Us brand. Here's a place I bet you haven't heard of. Welcome to Giraffe Manor, a special place that is only 30 minutes away from Nairobi Airport, and is a amazing popular spot to be for those taking a little trip to Africa. But what is this? Built in 1932 as a private Scottish-style hunting lodge in Kenya, Giraffe Manor was transformed in 1974 by this couple, Jacques and Betty Leslie Melville, to be turned into a conservation sanctuary for the endangered Rothschild giraffe, now known as the Nubian giraffe. And there's even a book about this place through their book called Raising Daisy Rothschild. It's hard to believe that giraffes could have been endangered, but a number of species are and still are, especially this species. In fact, here's a shocking thing to think about. 1974, at the time, there were said to be less than 100 or so giraffes of these giraffes living in the world. They were able to successfully capture Daisy, a female, and throughout time, more Rothschild giraffes have been brought to this area, and they have bred, and as a result, conservation has shown that their numbers are increasing. But who also knew that you could vacation in a hotel all near the African savannah and join a giraffe for breakfast each morning? Honestly, I would love to go there myself. I only hope that I can one day. But first, I would love to read the Raising Daisy Rothschild book. Which, speaking of which, I probably should get going with. I should probably go onto eBay and look for it. So until this Saturday, this is Safari Mack. I'll see you all out there, and thank you for joining me today.